All right, if everybody could please make it towards their seats, and we are going to go ahead and get started here with our first keynote speaker. First speaker we have up is Jennie Smith, and she is the worldwide Director of Sales Excellence for Kemin. And what she's going to talk about today is a little bit of generations. I know that myself, obviously being a second generation, many of you guys, we go to a lot of meetings all across the United States in different areas, and you see grandpas, dads, the kids, grandkids coming to the meetings, and we see that generational change happening all the time through all the territories, and even us obviously having it happen at DAC. And I got to hear Jennie speak at the Performance Horse Nutrition Summit 4 years ago now, and loved it. She brings a lot of energy. We had our conference call the other week, got off the phone, and it makes me motivated. And I think that what she's gonna have in store for you guys today is really, really good. So with that being said, I'll let Jennie take it over, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Yes. I want to thank DAC's team, the whole team. It's been such a pleasure to get to work with you all. So far this year, I've been in 5 countries, and it's really been a challenging start to the year, and I can't tell you how glad I am to be in the Midwest. I'm born and raised in Iowa on a family farm, and not only am I in a place that I enjoy despite cooler weather, I think that this is spring is a time, and I'll share a little bit with you about why it's my favorite time. But I want to thank the team at Performance Horse Nutrition. Trusting me in front of customers is a big deal to me. And so I am really greatly appreciative of their trust, as well as my team at Kemin. I have been around quite a lot this past couple years, but I have 2 of the finest guys at Kemin that I know that are in the whole company. So thank you for the honor to get to join you guys today. As I said, my name is Jennie Smith, born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa, and the invitation to join you today was a bit intimidating, to be honest. It sounds to me like you already have some super sales stars already to begin with. Andy, I don't know if I could teach you anything. Maybe I feel like you could teach me something, baby Jesus. Tell me. So what I wanted to do is share a little bit about something different and something that's very personal to me. I live on a century farm in Iowa, so generations is a really important thing. I was raised as a Quaker in Warren County, and so I thought, what a great opportunity to talk to families and professionals in an audience. And we're going to talk a little bit about some generations and also what comes along with that, which is change. I am a producer. Now, I'm not your kind of producer. In fact, later in the slide set, I was tempted to put a picture of someone training a horse, and then I pulled back because I said, I don't think that this is a good choice. I think you know more about horses than I do, just in case I got it wrong. But what do I produce? So when I started, I graduated from Iowa State with a general degree, and I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, so I started in sales in the insurance industry, but then my father was diagnosed with brain cancer in 2008. And at that point in my life, I realized that I had grown up on a farm, but I had also grown up on a farm with mandatory chores, but also mandatory free time. And it was just a part of who I was, but I wouldn't say that I was prepared to think about it maybe from a more professional sense. So I moved home to spend more time with my father, and then I had a great idea. I said, what if I decided to start raising vegetables on this farm and selling them? So I paid for my undergraduate university on my own by working in restaurants, and I knew that I had a few customers already because these were chefs that I had already known and worked for. And so in 2008, I became a tomato farmer. Of course, against all of my father's wishes, which was to not go on the farm and start raising vegetables. But, at that point in time, it was my decision. Does anyone in this room raise heirloom tomatoes? Yes? What's your favorite kind of tomato? Mortgage lifter, I had to ask, because now I'm curious. I will not spend the whole time talking about tomatoes. I promise, RJ. I won't do it. Mortgage lifter is one of my favorite, too. German pink is another one that's similar. I go between the two. Yeah. So I spent a decade of my life raising heirloom tomatoes and selling in the central Iowa market. So that's the type of producer that I am. And then I started working for Kemin 10 years ago, working in specialty horticulture sales. So I sold products for specialty markets like hops and blueberries. And when I got the invitation to join you here today, it was a bit sentimental for me because I've actually spent a lot of time in this area. Just northwest of here, there is a greenhouse called Green Circle Growers, and it's a Dutch greenhouse, and they're quite large. In fact, a little over 100 acres of glass. And so this was my first customer as a salesperson. So I flew into Cleveland, and I would spend my time driving around. So it's really nice to be back here. Not only do I come from a family farm, but something I wanted to share is a personal story, and one of the reasons why I show up, why I do what I do, is because I work for a family-owned company. In fact, Kemin was founded by R.W. Nelson in the 1960s, and this is his children. This is a little bit later on, early 70s. They had 5 children, and the founder of our company, he's got a little bit of spirit. In fact, he grew up on a sheep farm, and he would leave on Mondays, and he started with flavor agents and also dewormers. So he would show up, he would go on Monday and he would leave and he'd start driving and he'd start selling things. And he'd come home on Friday and he'd look at his wife, Mary, and he'd say, okay, this is the orders that I've also committed, so we need to start making the product. This is the true just-in-time manufacturing model. But that was his spirit and that was his innovation. And we are still really lucky today to have him as a part of the business. In fact, he just turned 98 years old last week. So as a second generation, he had 5 children, and one of them is Chris Nelson. And Chris Nelson is actually our current CEO. He's been our CEO since 1999. And I'm very fortunate because he's my boss, so I get to spend a lot of time with him. And in fact, they're pretty much an open book about a lot of stories. But to go from a sheep farm and driving around central Iowa to a $1.2 billion company in 2025, it's quite a lot of growth. It's a lot of change. And let me tell you, some of the conversations weren't always polite, so I hear. But today we have a few of the Nelsons still in the family business, most certainly the 3rd generation. And it's really meaningful when you get to see the dedication of the family, but also those that are not in the family. So if you're in a family-owned business, you have a bond within your company, but there's also people that are inspired by that as well. Even if they're not a part of the family, they're the secondary part of the family. So I thought we'd start out in talking about a little bit on generations. Is anyone here in a family-owned business? Yep, a few of us, okay. So I thought we'd take a look at a little bit of the generational landscape that we see today because it's quite interesting when you look at the world population. So this is from the USDA 2019. By the way, has everybody got their surveys sent in? I got a nasty email reminding me, you must send this in. And I'm not even operating the tomato farm right now, but I had to remember, USDA census, send it in. So when we look at this map, what I'm showing you is farm producers, and specifically within age ranges. And it's actually quite interesting. If we look at the age ranges are older for farm producers in the United States, more so in the Southwest. And if you look at where we are kind of in the Midwest, we actually have a little bit of some younger ages as farm producers within the US. However, this does not indicate the overall statistic that we see in all of the United States, which the age of farmers is increasing overall by about 1.2 years from 2012 to 2017. Current time on farm, an average of 21.3 years. Now, I'm a farmer, and you know what this makes me realize is that I really like it a lot. And my questions that I wanted to probe you with, as our legacy farmers retire, who's going to be taking over? Is it identified? Will it be the same handover as somebody who received a farm before or participated in a farm? And if so, what resources do they need today in 2025 and beyond versus maybe in 1960 when a manufacturing business was taken over by a son. In fact, the resources are quite different because the landscape is different. As RJ had indicated, my title is I work within the sales component at Kemin. I love sales. It doesn't matter what I'm selling. Tomatoes, insurance, keynote speeches, it doesn't matter what I'm selling. I just love to sell. And what's unique is that the sales process has changed because the world has changed. If you think back to early on sales, pre-industrial revolution, this was a relationship-based sales model. Everything was about relationship. And in fact, even if you took in sales training courses to this day, we coach and educate about how important that relationships are within sales. However, that does not mean that that's the only thing that we must do to have a successful business today. That's a bare minimum. It's a minimum expectation out of a transaction or a relationship, is you have to have a strong relationship. So the Industrial Revolution happened, and then things started to change a little bit, in which when you went to maybe a market or a grocery store, there's no longer one type of shampoo or one type of dog food. There's many. So then a sales model changed because there was many manufacturers coming up. It is now based on a product sales model. I have this product, and here's my features and benefits. And this is the differentiation of this product against something else. So of course we had relationship as the minimum, but now we also have to have products that contain features and attributes that we can talk about. And then lastly, we went through, or are going through, a digital revolution, which has yet another changed a landscape. And if we look at a lot of the sales models today, relationships is a must. You must have products, but then today, you must understand your customer's business and deliver on what we call outcomes. A lot of times we hear in the sales world that we sell solutions. And I always tell my teams at Kemin, that was a really great idea until everybody sells solutions. It's kind of like saying we have great service. I can appreciate that, but what does that mean? Can I see it? Can I smell it? Can I feel it? If everybody says we have great service, then it takes the quality of that and really starts to deflate that. So in today's outcome in today's world, what people are really looking for is experience and outcomes. And so let's take a look about not just within agriculture, but maybe the workforce in general. I won't ask how many baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Zs. But as you can see, and as you understand and know, the age is shifting in all areas of business, not just farming, agriculture, manufacturing. It's shifting. And in fact, when I look at the audience, when I spend time around the world, I see this also everywhere else in the world. I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil 2 weeks ago for our kickoff in South America. Over half the audience was women in our animal industry. It was profound. I hadn't seen anything like that before. And so this causes change. Turnover causes change. And how successful we are, both emotionally, spiritually, financially, is all dependent upon how we can manage change within our lives. So one of the things that you hear a lot of in the corporate world is employee engagement. I come to you today with a very corporate term. In fact, we measure this. Gallup is a leading organization that measures employee engagement. They're based out of Omaha, and they do a lot of research on statistics about how to keep engaged. Today, we live in a world of distractions. We have a lot going on around us. And so as we look at generations and keeping them interested, but also innovative, this is dependent upon a level of engagement in which they have. The expectations, even as the sales model that I shared with you, the expectations of people in a work environment have also grown and have also changed. And we are lucky enough to be in an area in the country, in my opinion, and an industry, in my opinion, that really values the history, the legacy, the past, all that has gone in to get us to where we are today. And so where we got us, what we did to get us to today, we need to think of what are we going to do for the future. So Gallup defines engagement as the involvement and enthusiasm of employees in their work and workplace. It's a mouthful, in fact. There's quite a lot of large components that you think about when you look at involvement and enthusiasm. Those are two very different things. In fact, growing up, my grandmother always told me, "Sweetums, you can rule with a carrot or a stick." She preferred the stick. Still love her just as much. So I wanted to share with you, this is also from Gallup's research. This is some of the publications that they've done, which is what's the change in the mindset? So we know that we need to have involvement and we need to have engagement of individuals taking our business to the next level. In fact, the DAC team got to celebrate $10 million. That's a huge accomplishment. But they had to change in order to do that. So when we look at what is the mindset of maybe millennials and younger, they don't think about my paycheck. Instead, they think about what is my purpose. It's not any longer about how satisfied am I. I'm seeking development. And that can be somewhat scary for maybe managers, leaders, employers, family members, because developing individuals can also mean that they can take flight. In fact, I was fortunate to go last week to Gray Summit, Missouri, which is where one of the manufacturers has a dairy research farm. And the manager was faced with a critical decision because what he had to do was do a round of layoffs 2 years ago. And he said, "Jennie, I felt so uncomfortable because these individuals that were working for me came from academia and they received their PhDs and then they come to this research farm. And it's very comfortable here. There's lots of great labs, lots of great research acres. It's about 1,000 acres. And when he had to do a round of layoffs, he felt that these individuals who were really talented and technically proficient, he knew he was releasing them out into the world, but maybe not as developed from a business acumen or a relationship standpoint, or understanding the reason that we do the research is for a commercial purpose." So it was quite interesting to hear him talk about what his team is thinking for development. The hierarchy in today's landscape is different. My boss, my authority is now my coach. I expect you to coach me and give me feedback that I can use and implement immediately. And so as you look through some of these, what they're looking for today is a purpose in meeting. And when you start with one generation, it doesn't stay within that generation. In fact, it bleeds through other types of generation because things will start to trend. Adults hesitate with change. I say adults because the brain is roughly developed around 25 years of age. Men a little bit slower. Excuse me. Why hesitate with change? Have we thought about this? One of the reasons that we hesitate with change is because we are a living organism. Living organisms are constantly in a process to get to equilibrium, homeostasis. And so when we instigate change, this is going away from homeostasis. This is a protection mechanism. This is how we have evolved. In fact, when I do some coaching about negotiations or shared purposes and working on closing deals with some of our sales teams, one of the challenges they have is that they fear rejection. In fact, for those of you who have ever went on, a romantic relationship in your life, rejection might be one of the feelings that you might have a small concern about. Most certainly my husband's. This is the reality, is evolution. If you think back to history and how we lived, rejection was almost a death sentence because we were more communal. We relied more upon ourselves. the United States has actually grown and evolved into much more of an individualistic society than a lot of other countries within the world. So when we change, our brain signals stress. And in fact, cortisol is being released because it's saying, hey, this is different. You need to be aware. Be on guard. So what we do is our brain wants to tell us, hold on, let's stick to the status quo. The status quo is the easiest decision to make because it doesn't cause the risk and it doesn't cause the change. Our brain is naturally telling us that, is this right or wrong? And how do I seek validation? And typically, if I spend long enough time, I will delay the decision and revert to no, or stay still. Of course, this is not all the cases and not all the decisions we make in life. But I bring this to you from a scientific perspective because our world changes and our behaviors change over time. There was a good book I was sharing with my team. I haven't read it yet, but I got to hear a little bit of some of the words, and it was from author James Clear, and it's a book called Atomic Habits. And in fact, what this researcher suggests, and he says, we spend so much time focusing on the result and focusing on the outcome. Maybe there's some, I know for sure there's some statistics on how successful New Year's Eve resolutions or resolutions happen. What is the success rate? It's kind of low, actually. But we spend so much time focusing on the result and the outcome when really we need to be thinking about the small behaviors. As he calls it, 1% every day. If I can have 1% improvement every day, what does that accumulate to? In fact, in Japan, there's a term for that, and it's called Kaizen. And that term means small, incremental growth over time. It's not to avoid the cortisol, by the way, but it's more of a theory. So, by the way, this was where I was going to have the picture of the horse and the trainer, but then I thought, I don't know if I should do that. That's a risk with this audience. So I went with my comfort zone and went back to horticulture. Change. It's beautiful. It's inevitable. It must happen. It's a part of our living life. And I don't know about you, but I love living in the Midwest. And I love having, well, we used to have 4 seasons, negotiable now, but I love the season changeover because it's also my clock. In the winter, the less light, I'm slower, I'm spending more time in home, I'm nesting, I'm doing projects with inside the house. In summer, you cannot find me. I am on a 4-wheeler over the hill, I am not in the house, and I don't know where my shoes are. That's just how the life works in my cycle. But change is inevitable. And I think it's important that we think about how we embrace change and how we demonstrate change. And how we demonstrate that absorbing a little bit of that cortisol and releasing it is actually quite impactful. So I told you at the start that I work for a family company. And Kemin, over time, starting with $0 in sales and an entrepreneur selling things that was not even made yet, to now a $1.2 billion company in 130 countries, it takes a lot of governance. It takes a lot of willingness to change and a lot of people on board. And so I wanted to share with you, I interviewed our CEO, Dr. Chris Nelson, and I thought, is there something that we can give audiences around the world as how we perceive handling change, specifically within family-owned businesses and generations? This is not exclusive to family-owned businesses either. But we looked at a couple pillars at what is really specific. So I'm going to show you a couple slides on some practices that we have, and I hope some of you can take a few of them and a few things along the way and make yourself and your life successful. Number 1, common ground across generations. In fact, if you're having crucial conversations or conflict management or conflict conversations, the goal at that point is not to persuade. In fact, the goal at that point is to do something which is coming to a shared purpose. If you're having an argument with someone, you're not going to convince them to come your way necessarily. If you are, I might hire you for some negotiation training, but it's typically you need to come to a shared purpose. It's very similar. When we look at multi-generations coming together, younger, older, we need to find the middle area. What are these shared values that we have? Because we need to find the values that unite us and not separate us. I have 2 stepchildren, and they're both in their 20s. And I wasn't a part of their life. They weren't in my world when they were younger growing up, but I see them now and how different they are. One is a skydiver, and he is seeking adrenaline and life and people and experiences. And the other one is the most loyal, humble meat cutter at Costco in North Carolina you have ever met. He just wants to cut the meat. And they just don't like each other right now. They're about 26 and 28. They just don't. And so I'm trying to find ways, and what I found myself doing was I was comparing one against the other. Well, you know, Ethan, you're really loyal, but you don't have any flexibility, and you don't approach people with a smile. In fact, you look mean, you know. And Holland, you don't even know where your shoes are. In fact, I was sharing with the team, he's staying with us this week, and he's feral. I mean, convincing him to flush the toilet has been a challenge for the past 4 days. So I'm thankful for the night in the hotel room by myself. I mean, I'm comparing the two against each other, and that's not the right way to approach it. A friend of mine is a child therapist, and she says, they're individuals, Jennie. You don't benchmark them against themselves. And so when we think about generations within a successful workplace, you're not benchmarking, well, you know what, you really need to do it like the legacy people, or you need to approach this like the young mindset. It's not how we approach this. Building emotional bonds, we all know that pillars of integrity are important. This is a given. But there's actually a term for this, and it's called psychological glue. What are the things that we're doing voluntarily, proactively, to strengthen emotional bonds? It's an interesting reflection. Because if we aren't doing things proactively to strengthen an emotional relationship, when that relationship is tested with emotion, that is the wrong time to start preparation. You're too late. So what are we doing? What is this glue that holds? Because when change puts pressure, this is one of the easiest ways to default is an emotional response. Ownership competence. I'm sure we're actually going to get to hear from Randy and RJ. I've utilized my resources. I wanted to hear from them. This is such a topic in which they've lived and breathed, so we'll hear from them in a little bit. But handing over the business isn't easy. You know, neither is swimming. But what do? You know, you just drop them in, see what happens, kind of. Not quite like that, but handing over business is not easy. In fact, it takes a lot of preparation. There's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of resources, a lot of functions, maybe regulatory, that you don't spend a lot of time in your life working that needs to be a part of this handover. And so preparing them with responsibilities is really important. In fact, having someone take on more responsibility, in fact, can have a lot of growth trajectory within people. Having responsibility and accountability helps maturity and growth over time. Respecting the past, but don't be afraid to innovate. We tend to be a little bit more of a risk-averse company. We're family-owned, and innovation is critical for us to succeed. We must figure out, what does the market in southern Chennai, India need? Where is that different than from Alberta, Canada? And how do we produce this in Des Moines, Iowa? It requires a lot of innovation, and not just with products, but it requires innovative ideas. There's a lot of tech companies in the world right now. And I think that there's a lesson that can be learned from their mindset, which is experimentation. I know in our legacy company, we're a little bit afraid to demonstrate our experiments outside of the walls of the company. Sure, we're experimenting in things, but showing people that, showing them the negative trial results hasn't always been the way of thinking. But when you look at growth in tech companies today, we want to experiment a lot of times. We want to throw something out into the market and let you touch it, play with it, see it, tell us what you think. Because only you will have the ideas to help us incrementally make something better. And last, plan for what's next. I am astonished at my grandmother's mindset, at which she refuses to share her legacy plan. It is under locks. I know the key, but I just have respected her and I have not gone in to look at those documents, but it's just not comfortable for her. And on the other side of my family, that set of grandparents, before they passed, they were very comfortable. Everyone sat around the dining room table and we said, you're going to have the bean farm over here and you're going to take the house. It was very clear for that process, but it's not cohesive, it's not standardized. And so whether you communicate the plan or not is a personal choice, but the fact of not having a plan, when I lost my mother-in-law and she did not have a plan, it was significantly more work and a lot more emotions started to come in. So for generational change, I highly recommend putting together the plan. These are Kemin's governance mechanisms dealing with a family. There are 5 children and there are 10 grandchildren, and the next round, great-grandchildren, are going to start coming next. So when we look at some of these governance mechanisms, this is our North Star. This is how we handle family, business, emotions, and change by having a structural process. Some of these can be helpful. It's not a copy-paste. In fact, I think on my last slide, there is no cut and paste. There is no off-the-shelf process for this. It's a very specified work. Having your purpose and values. In fact, in my opinion, sometimes we can overdo this, having a mission posted everywhere. Sure, it's boardroom, it's everywhere, but I think we have understanding. What is the purpose and mission? Family charter. I'm currently serving on a board for nonprofit. It's a nonprofit, and we took a 700-acre farm and parceled it out to give access to people who want to have a small vegetable farm or a small livestock operation. And what I realize is being on this board, because I'm not typically on a lot of boards, is that we don't have a charter. And I don't know what you're supposed to do or what's the expectation of me. And it was a really interesting process so that we could have this charter. It's the same in a family business. Who's doing what? Who's responsible? How do we like to work together? What are danger zones? What are risks? But it's a charter that says, this is how we operate. Family meetings. Family meetings can be good, bad. Deliberate family meetings outside of a standardized schedule that says, today, this is our focus. We're taking the time to get together to bond, or we're setting aside the time to make decision making. And it's very clear for everyone going into the meeting is understanding what type of meeting it is. Is this a discussion meeting or decision, or is this an emotional connection? Without prefacing those types of interactions, it's very difficult for the brain to understand, how do I need to contribute today and what value can I add out of the interaction? Time is so limited. Conflict resolution. I shared with you earlier, crucial conversations, coming to shared purposes, outlining how this will be handled. And finally, having a board of directors, and one of the things I think is really helpful is having an outside-in perspective. What has made other people successful? Would this be applicable to us or not? So for you, I put together a few last comments that I thought in terms of what can you take away out of this conversation? No, I'm not a succession planner. I wish I could be at times, because those have been some really difficult conversations in my personal family farm. Each generation has their own uniqueness, and we need to embrace and appreciate that. But how are we going to leverage each other's strengths to complement each other? Most certainly, they say mimicry is one of the greatest forms of compliments. We don't want to all start mimicking each other, because if we start mimicking each other, then the values and the attributes that we could be adding to the equation are reduced. Preparing for the next generation, leadership is not inherited. In fact, I'd complain about this too much, but when I grew up, if you wanted a car or you wanted to have something, you had to buy it. There was plenty of ways to go about that, hustling the grandparents, can I come work over here, can I earn $1 there? But if you wanted something, you saved for it and you purchased it. And same thing with education. I remember the day when I was going to start applying for college and I asked my dad, I said, how do I pay for it? And he says, I have no idea. I mean, it wasn't even his radar, right? I don't know, there's an office, I hear it's the financial office, go there, let's start there. And it was a great starting point, in fact. And I was very successful. It took me a lot of interest that I didn't want to pay, and it took me a lot of hard work, but of course I paid for college. Anyone can pay for college. It's a simple game. It's not a game. It's a simple process. But it's a difficult one to endure over a long period of time. So do not give things. In fact, our human instinct is to work for things. If you think about dopamine, which is the hormone of satisfaction, when you easily give things, the pathway is very short, and your brain wants to start to pressure the pain pathway instead of the pleasure pathway. So when we have to work for things, our outcome is much higher and longer over a period of time. Change is not a threat. You tell that brain as soon as that cortisol to just calm down a little bit. Change can be stressful. We need to understand the inherent way our brain works in order to recognize when it's getting to be a little spicy up there. Open communication, I told you, this is not the time to, when conflict arises, you're too late. It requires methodical preparation. And how are we going to handle these situations when they arise? And finally, investing in that cohesion. Investing prior to, taking the time to set aside, this is a time we're building bonds and this is a time we're talking business and making decisions. So I hope there was a few things out of my presentation that I could give you with to have you start thinking. My job is to probe you with thoughts. We got to spend time together to meet, and I hope this presentation gave you a couple ideas that could take flight within your recognition. And that being said, I thought we should talk to people that have a little more experience than I do. Why not? We're going to take a quick moment, and I'm going to grab some chairs, and then we're going to invite Randy and RJ to come up here, and I have prepared some questions to ask them. They're difficult ones. I was not going to make it easy on them. But we also have a microphone, and I've got my team, and what they're going to do is they're going to be floating around. So if you have a question, and actually I don't think there's no audio connected, so maybe if you stand up and shout it out, that's fine too, but we have one microphone we can pass around. But this is a time for you. They gave me full permission. I said, I want you on stage, and they can ask you anything. Don't get too much into tech talk, though. We can save that for the break or lunch. But you're welcome to ask any questions that you may have on how they specifically have handled generation and change for them. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this. Oh, yeah. Do I need to oh, no, I don't need this. I've already got one. How bad is that? I told you the second coffee was a bad choice. I told you. Do I need to give an introduction to these lovely gentlemen up here? No. Very good. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, RJ, for taking your time in preparation with everything that you've had going on. And thank you for being and sharing some of your wisdom and your experiences with all of the audience. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of, if Randy was willing to share. Some of you, I know you've been around the room quite a long time, but maybe as you started to approach the business, the shortened version of basically a little history and how you got involved in this.
How much time you got?
Well, we'll just turn the clock off. That's fine.
There you go.
Tina
turn that
said,
clock
yeah,
off.
we're good.
Yes. You know, somebody said earlier, I think RJ might have said earlier, that Trapper in the back of the room is really responsible for me being here today. He approached me a couple years before I ever had an interest in, owning the company, and I still had a barn full of show horses. I had a breeding barn full of breeding horses, 100 head of horses on the property. I had used DAC for many years, and I've had a lot of success with it. I tell the story that, I used to put DAC in different buckets or different bags and try to fool my competition. I didn't want them to know that I was using DAC. It was a secret to my success. I mean, any little edge you can get in the competitive world, you take that edge, and DAC was my competitive edge. And then I become an owner, and the first 8 years I still fed DAC. I still was training horses, and my wife would say, you're making your job a lot harder. You're telling people, you're telling your peers what you're doing, and I would say, well, I don't tell them exactly how much to use. And so I still had that little bit of an edge, but I always thought that if somebody took DAC and just shared how to feed it and what I did, what I used, that the company could grow. Did I think it would do what it has today? I can't believe it's been 18 years since I've been an owner already. I mean, time flies when you're having fun. But it's incredible. And again, I think it's the people that I've surrounded myself with. I've been very fortunate. I wouldn't trade the world for any one of the people that are with our team. I've been very fortunate. They work hard, and like RJ has said many times, it's a team, it's a family, and it's the way it's grown, it's incredible, But again, I didn't have the magic wand or anything, and I just, honesty. I tell people, we don't have magic dust. If you don't know the answer, don't ever BS somebody. Tell them I don't know, but I know somebody I can get the answer to you. And I think that's just, it's been so important. I strive that and stress that to all the people. Don't ever badmouth somebody else's product or company. We're not going to grow doing that. I don't tolerate it. And,
This is what the long game looks like, right?
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
over 18 years in success. Now,
Right.
I got a question about Trapper. It's not on the questions I gave them. I got a question about Trapper. Has he convinced you to take apple cider vinegar, baking soda, and lemon juice 2 times a day? Because last night we were talking about the secrets to longevity, and he almost has me willing to do it.
Yeah.
You're right. He's a good sales guy, right?
Yeah, he could sell ice to Eskimos, I'm telling you. Yes. So, no, I mean, he's been great, to the company, to me over the years. I used to buy a lot of horses that had issues, and Trapper would say, hey, we're going to use this. This is what we're going to use, and we're going to fix it. Or I would say, man, I got this issue, and can we fix that? And he'd be like, leave it alone, stay away. And there's somebody else in the room that I owe a lot of thanks to, Vernon Slayball. Vernon was my blacksmith, the only blacksmith I had for 30 years. I grew up around Vernon. He worked for my dad part-time. Vernon's been a DAC dealer since the company started. And, I owe a lot to him. He's helped me learn a lot about the product over the years as well. And, I would bounce off to him. He was at my place every other Tuesday for almost 30 years. So you became good friends, not only my blacksmith, but, I would say, you think I ought to buy DAC? What do you think the possibilities are? And, he would say, nobody better. You should do it. You're out and about. You've fed it for so long. You know the products. And so, looking back, it was a great decision. It was at the time, it was a lot of money. My wife was a school teacher. She backed me 100% the whole time. She's never really been involved in the business. She didn't want any part of that, but she's backed my decisions 100%. She's never questioned me. When she retired 2 years ago, we won a travel, and I was hoping this guy would want an interest. And you always wonder, is he paying attention?
Because in this generation, you feel like the answer is no. Some days.
Yes. I mean, is he learning enough? Is he capable?
Yeah.
It was a big fear to step away. And I've always been the person with the mindset is just because you don't do it my way doesn't mean it's not right. There's many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to reach the end result. So it doesn't always have to be my way. So I knew I could let that go, but it is hard.